Welcome to the Little Red Podcast, which brings you China from beyond the Beijing Beltway. I'm Graham Smith from the Australian National University's Department of Civic Affairs, and I'm joined by my co-host, Louisa Lin, former China correspondent for the BBC and NPR, now with the Centre for Advancing Journalism at Melbourne University. We're on air thanks to support from the Australian Centre on China in the World, and we broadcast from the lands of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people and the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation.
Imagine an exam so important that the whole country comes to a standstill for 2 days. Pop concerts are postponed, cars are forbidden from honking their horns, some cities even offer free taxis for the 13 million students sitting the exam. It's a test so crucial that the people who set the exam questions are kept prisoner for 6 months under guard by the People's Armed Police.
In the latest episode in our series on belief, we're talking about the one institution in China that everyone seems to believe in, the Gaokao, China's college entrance exam, commonly thought to be the toughest school-leaving exam in the world. It's an exam that, in theory, can completely transform your life, taking you from the poorest village in Anhui to a cushy government job in Beijing.
And we're joined by 3 people who have either studied the Gaokao or studied for the Gaokao or both. Edward Vickers is a professor at Kyushu University. He's the co-author of Education and Society in Post-Mao China, and he's the host of the Asian Education podcast. Karron Huang is studying for a master's in early childhood education at the University of Melbourne. She did the Gaokao in 2015. And Ruixue Xia is a professor of economics at the University of California, San Diego. She's just co-authored The Highest Exam, How the Gaokao Shapes China.
Ruixue, let's start with you. To what extent is the Gaokao the successor of the Imperial Civil Service Examination, which were abolished in 1905? I mean, what does it take from the original civil service exams and how is it different?
As many of you know, China has a long history of exams. It can be dated back at least to the 600 AD, where you already have the emperor started the clergy system, the imperial exam system. It was initially at a small scale and became expanded around 1000 in the Song dynasty. And then it became relatively stable. And as you mentioned, until it's abolished in 1905. Obviously, China, has changed a lot. Many things have changed. In the exam, initially people were tested for, writing poetry, and later became about computation with very restrictive forms of essays. And now it's English, math, and STEM, right? So on the one hand, it looks hugely different about what you are testing. On the other hand, as I wrote in the book and explained in the book, the underlying logic has, amazing parallel. So the key feature of having exam system as an education system is that it's a selection mechanism. It selected people for intelligence and for hard work. It's, in that sense, it's still the same, that it's not the content that matters. Of course, it matters, right? If you learn poetry today, you may not be able to work with AI. In that sense, it matters. But on the other hand, the logic of select intelligent people, hardworking people, historically it was only men, and today's men and women. That logic persists.
Edward, your book takes up the story of how the Gaokao was revived after taking a long pause in the Mao era. I mean, how much is today's Gaokao different from the one that was reintroduced in 1978?
I mean, it's essentially very similar. The subjects that are tested are, if not exactly the same, largely the same. So, Chinese, maths. I'm not sure that if English was tested right from the reintroduction of the Gaokao in 1978. Certainly by the 1990s, English was part of the Gaokao.
I think one major change is the scale. It's like in 1977, in that cohort, it's a very special cohort because the exam was stopped during the Cultural Revolution. So then many people took the exam, was just restated. This is people ranging from very young people aged at 16 to very old people aged at 40. And if you think about the admission rate, how many of these people would end up in the college? It was a 4.8%, lower than 5%. So it's lower than Harvard or Stanford admission rate. Today, guess what's the admission rate among like 10 million of exam takers? It's 80%.
Yeah, the expansion of the scale is a key point, and it's one that you make in your book. And I think your co-author, Li Hongbin, he talks about how basically when he was at school in the 1980s, not everyone was expected to go for the Gaokao. I mean, actually, it was relatively rare to be pushed forward to take the Gaokao. But nowadays, at least for those in academic high schools, everyone is going for the Gaokao, and most of those are expecting to get into university. So the scale of the exam has increased, but also the scale, and you talk about a centralized hierarchical tournament, that the scale of participation in that tournament has massively increased. And really the sort of turning point was in the 1990s. As Ruixue was saying, from the late 70s through the 1980s, the proportion of students taking the Gaokao who got through to any sort of university was very, very low. But by the same token, most students were not going forward to take the Gaokao at all. And as Ruixue's co-author Li Hongbin says in the book, that at least I think his sense is that there was sort of less pressure on the student population generally in the 1980s because this tournament that Ruixue and Hongbin talk about was not sort of participated in by the whole of the student population. But by the early 2000s, at least for those going to academic high schools, almost all of them were taking the Gaokao, and the vast majority of them were getting through into some sort of college. But that relates to, well, there's a couple of things. One is that actually, arguably, the key cutoff point or the sort of key point at which students are channeled one way or the other in the Chinese education system is actually not the Gaokao. It's the Zhongkao. It's the senior high school entrance examination. Because what happens at that point is that around half of the student population get diverted away from the academic stream into the vocational stream. So they are the ones who don't actually get to take the Gaokao. I mean, the vast majority of those, taking the Gaokao is not an option for them. So at the age of 15, around half of students are told, university's not for you.
It's actually most students still go to the normal, you call it high academic schools. And the background is that the government realized that, China lacked unskilled labor like many countries do. So they want to, adopt the Germany model. But as you can imagine, there's a lot of pushback because families don't want to do that. So far, this separation hasn't been implemented.
Well, absolutely. The target is a 50-50 split, but families are desperate not to be assigned to the vocational stream. So there's a lot of pushback against that. As the saying goes, vocational education is a great idea for other people's children.
That's a very good way to put it. Yeah.
And so particularly urban hukou holders, almost all of those will be sending their people with urban residency, people who are sort of formally part of the urban population. They'll be sending all of them will be sending their kids to academic high schools. The ones who tend to get diverted away from the academic stream, either to vocational schools or to lower level academic high schools that don't offer a very realistic prospect of entry to a decent college, are overwhelmingly people living in the countryside and children of migrant workers in the cities.
Karron, I would love it if you could talk a little bit about your own experience as a student who's taken the Gaokao. I mean, I believe that you went to an extremely selective school, the Foshan No. 1 high school, which coincidentally is the school that Kamala Harris's running mate, Tim Walz, spent some time at. And I mean, I recently read an account of one of these hothouse schools. They were talking about a school in Hengshui in Hebei, where students even had to eat really fast and run to the canteen to take meals in order to maximize the amount of time that they spent studying. I mean, how stressful was it for you as a student doing the Gaokao?
So talking about my experience in high school, my schedule is like we woke up at 6 in the morning. We all live in school. For some of the good schools, like just as you said, we live in school to save time. And then from 6 o'clock in the morning until 10 o'clock in the evening, we went back to the dormitory. Then we went to sleep. And most students in year 12, they would like to stay on campus during the weekends. Like for me personally, I went back home every 2 weeks for 1 day. The thing is that if you live in the dormitory, usually you finish Friday night study at school. It means that you will stay in school for Friday night, and then your parents coming to pick you up on Saturday morning. Then they bring you back home, you have some rest, maybe people go to weekend school as well. Then you come back to school on Sunday afternoon around 5 p.m. Then you go into another week study.
So wait, you study from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. every day? Is that what you're saying?
Because we all live in the dormitory. And then we wake up at 6. 7 o'clock, the dormitory will close the door. So you have 1 hour to get all the stuff done, and then you're going to leave that place. Our class, we start 10:30 in the morning. It's not the worst, I would say. Like you said, people in Hengshui, they start even earlier, like 6:30 in the morning. I feel like in Guangdong province, we don't have, not that intensive, I would say. Still intensive compared to the schooling in Australia, but because we are sort of like wealthier. And like Hengshui, because Hengshui located in, I believe it's in Henan, they have a bigger population and they have lower rate for enrollment to higher education. That's what makes them more stressful. And then the thing is that if you live on the dormitory, 8 a.m. until 5 p.m., you finish the class, then you have some time to maybe take a shower, have dinner. Then we need to get back to the classroom by 7. Then you start another 2 or 3 hours nighttime study in the classroom. That's mostly our day. It feels like it's hard to believe thinking back on those days. But I feel like when you are in that group, everybody does the same. So you don't feel that miserable for yourself.
And Ruixue, was your experience similar?
Kind of. There's huge regional differences. And if you grow up in a richer area, you generally have better outside options. So the tension or the pressure is a bit more relaxed. But I grew up in a rural Shandong province, which is known to be very competitive in these exams. And this is related to the institutional background. So the college admission was governed by a quota system, and some regions get much higher quota, some provinces get much lower quota. And the provinces or regions get higher quota are two groups, like big metropolitan regions, Beijing, Shanghai. If you grew up there or you have hukou there, you're lucky, relatively speaking. And if you another region is actually the minority region. If you grew up, if you take a Gaokao in Xinjiang, Tibet, Qinghai, you also have a high quota per capita. And the regions that lose out from this allocation are the middle region with a lot of population. That's like Shandong, Henan, like Karron mentioned Henan, I think because it has this reputation that it's very harsh computation there. And the Guangdong, your home province, is also a province that have relatively low quota per capita because it has huge population size. So this means that, this tension, this pressure differs. But overall, it's a lot of pressure for the whole country, but even more so in my hometown, which especially in the rural area, right? So that's at that time, it's the only mobility channel you can think of. So obviously, we do all this from the beginning of the early morning to late evening, as Carol has described, maybe even more intense. The richer families would have private tutors, and the poor families would go to tutoring classes. And that's actually increased inequality a lot over time. So the system that's used to work well in terms of providing mobility in my time, now it's becoming a burden to many, many families. Edward, please.
Yeah, well, I think you're absolutely right in your comments on the so-called double reduction policy, which on the face of it is meant to dial down the sort of competitive intensity of the education system, but really it's dealing with the symptoms rather than the causes. Cram schooling, tutorial schooling is a symptom of the intensity. Students and parents are demanding it because of the intensity of the competition. So if you take away the cram schooling, the competition's still there. So they're still going to find other ways of trying to gain some kind of competitive advantage. And as you say, it can exacerbate inequality. But I mean, if we're thinking about what fuels that competitive intensity in the first place, I think at the very end of your book, you remark that actually the roots of the inequality don't lie so much in the Gaokao itself as in the sort of structuring of the education system sort of prior to that point. And I think that's absolutely right, because at every single level of the schooling system, there is this massive competition because there's inequality at every single level of the school system. Even within the same urban district, there'll be a good primary school and a middling primary school and a not so good primary. Well, and then there are kindergartens, of course, where the competition is arguably even more sort of cutthroat because that's pre-compulsory education. Every single level, there's this competition. And that's what, I mean, in your book, you're comparing China with America. That's it. That's your sort of default comparison. But in a way, a more appropriate comparison would be with other East Asian societies.
Maybe Singapore and Hong Kong.
Exactly. Singapore, Hong Kong, Taiwan, Japan, South Korea. I mean, where there's a similar sort of obsession with exams, and for somewhat similar reasons, because of, a sort of once for all chance to be branded as a sort of academic success or failure in the exam and get into a prestigious university, get a prestigious job. So that's quite similar across the region. But what's not, where China stands out, is the massive inequalities in its schooling system. So here in Japan, you go to an elementary school, anywhere in Japan, they look the same. The facilities are the same. The teachers are not even employed by the schools. They're employed by school districts and they're moved around between schools, all to sort of ensure equality of provision. And that's also related to a conception of citizenship that conceives of citizens as equal, as deserving of equal entitlements. Now, there's a dark side to that because citizens are also expected to be uniform and all the same culturally and so forth. But, that emphasis on equality is really baked into the system, whereas in China, it's not. And so, and what that reflects is that behind all the talk in China about, we are all one, we are all Chinese in the same way, we are all patriotic, long live Xi Jinping and the Communist Party, actually, citizenship in China is highly differentiated and frankly segregated, particularly between urban and rural areas. And that is, I think, fueling the extraordinary competition that we see in China, isn't it?
Yeah, no, absolutely agree. But to illustrate what the Gaokao is all about, what we're going to do now is run the first Little Red podcast, Gaokao. We're going to ask all of you a Gaokao question from this year's Chinese language exam, and we haven't prepped you guys before. We'll ask...
Oh, that's unfair.
Yeah, it's terribly unfair, but it makes for better radio. And we'll ask how you would answer the question. The one we've chosen is an essay question, and the prompt consists of 3 quotations by Chinese writers. Louisa will read the question.
So I'm going to read the 3 quotations first. The first one. He wished to sing a verse for the children, yet his heart churned so violently he could not open his lips. That's Lao She from The Storyteller. The second quote. If I were a bird, I too should sing with a hoarse throat. That's Ai Qing, the poet from I Love This Land. And then the third quote is, with bloodied hands, I shall embrace you one by one, for a nation has risen, and that's Mu Dan from Ode. And the question is, what associations and reflections do these passages evoke in you? Please write an essay.
Wow, it's quite difficult.
So, Karron, we're going to start with you because you're the most recent Gaokao taker. Ed, it's a bit unfair for you because you've never sat it, as far as I know. My understanding is an essay is around about 800 words, and you have about an hour to write it. How would you tackle this? Question?
I feel like the most safe way, I need to analyze all the 3 quotations and then get the similar points. So I think it's similar to how you write the essay here. We'll put it into 3 parts. The first part is the similarity. Then the second part, the differentiation among those 3 quotations. Then it comes to my solution. And within that, I need to use some practical examples from my life, whether it's maybe fake or not, and then to back up my thing. So I think from the 3 quotations, there's sort of contrast within each quotation. Like the second one says that it mentioned the bird, but I'm going to sing like a horse something.
With a hoarse throat. Yeah, so not a very beautiful song, a bit of a maybe not so nice to hear the song.
I have 2 ideas. The first is like, no matter how bad your life is, you need to see the good parts of it. That's the first one. The second one is that the author is trying to expressing some of their insatisfaction towards life because they make the comparison, which has sort of no meaning. They just want to make it like sarcastic, just to make a comparison. I'm not sure if I got the idea, because also Ruixue, the first author, that's his type. He would like to make the criticism of the society by using sort of weird words and maybe metaphor. This one's much harder. I feel like the shorter the sentence are, it's harder to make a whole 800 words essay. Yeah.
And Ruixue, what are your thoughts on this question? And would you answer it the same way?
From hearing Karron's answer, I can see she belongs to the young generation. It's very easy for me to see these questions are very ideological and nationalistic. It's like, it's intended to encourage students to think about, the humiliation of Chinese history part and thinking about how should we work together to build a bright future. I think these essays are, writing about the same era where, Chinese people has a lot of difficulty. This might be anti-Japan era. The correct format I already know when I was a student is to review the historical disaster China has experienced and end with, then talk about how people are all working hard to build the country and end with a bright future of the whole country, but also a little bit personal story. I am myself, writing this essay. I think about my bright future despite the past difficulty. Carol, you said you are belong to the young generation, which is great that you are more individualistic. So you think about you interpret this as, I have my personal feeling. That's good. I think this is I like this, your view better. It's just unfortunately I grew up in this nationalistic, perspective. It's just I'm used to this. I understand why they are doing this, and I will, if I needed to write it, I will cater to this need. But you shouldn't. You should just do what you are.
That's very interesting to hear Ruixue's answer, because I've never think like that way, that direction. But yours, I feel it sounds like the standard answer. You get the full score, I think. My version is a bit risky. So our teacher keeps telling us that no matter what your stories are, you just choose the safe choice. You just get the scores. It doesn't matter what you think. Yeah.
You are the future. You are the hope for the future, which I'm very happy to see. But I think just to a remark that about this is also about the education system and the testing, right? It's a besides trying to select, as I said, intelligent people, hardworking people in intelligence and diligence, is also trying to, select certain skills, STEM, English, but most importantly is to select ideology. So this kind of essays is the most apparent. So many of those are not testing questions. You cannot say this ideological, but the essay part, which actually a large portion for the Chinese part, is actually all usually very, very ideological. And it's kind of a common knowledge. So I'm happy that Carol, you already forgot this indoctrination.
Well, question for you, Edward, just to follow on from this, is, I mean, these questions are printed in the newspapers after the Gaokao to sort of educate the masses. Has this always been the case, that there's an ideological slant to them, or were things a bit different in the 80s and 90s?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes. Always. I think it's always been there. It's just been there in different ways. So, I mean, I entirely agree with Ruixue. I was surprised, indeed shocked, that Karron dared to provide such a sort of reflective and critical answer, because it seemed pretty obvious to me, as to Ruixue, that the sort of expected correct answer would be ideological. So, these birds are singing, well, with hoarse voices in the first place because they're suffering from the various humiliating experiences that the nation has experienced in modern times. I think the last quotation mentioned bloody birds, didn't it?
Yeah, with bloodied hands, I shall embrace you one by one, for a nation has risen.
Right, which I think inspires us to sing yet more, but happy songs, celebrating the marvelous achievements of the Communist Party in overcoming humiliation and leading China towards a brighter future. And personally, I feel inspired to sing songs celebrating my cultural self-confidence and faith in the leadership of Xi Jinping. I think that's how I would conclude my essay. But I mean, on the issue of these questions and whether they're really looking for sort of critical answers or whether they're basically looking for a set correct answer, I think an interesting comparison or anecdote relates not to mainland China but to Hong Kong, at the point at which Hong Kong was basically about to flip from a relatively open educational climate towards a very much more mainlandized one. So in 2020, there was a big scandal, I suppose, over an examination question in the A-level history exam in Hong Kong, which asked, I think the question was, the influence of Japan on China in the first half of the 20th century overall was more positive than negative. Do you agree? Something like that. Now, which is an excellent question, actually, if you know anything about Chinese history in the first half of the 20th century, because, of course, there's a lot of negative things to say about Japan's influence on China during that period, but Japan was essentially the template for Chinese modernizers as well. And, thousands and tens of thousands of Chinese sort of intellectuals came to Japan to study and to, learn from Japan's experience of modernization and so forth. So there's things to say on both sides. Marvelous question. But as soon as this got out and was published in the newspapers or shared in the media, there was absolute outrage from the pro-Beijing camp. Government representatives in Hong Kong came out and slammed it and said they would cancel the question after the students had already sat in the exam and written their answers.
Yeah, it's so interesting the way in which exams reflect national characteristics. And I'm reminded of the fact that here in Australia, every year, the people who set the exams manage to make a mistake. And normally it's on the specialised maths, the hardest exam, and they normally just get the wrong answer or put a question which can be answered in numerous different ways, but the people who are setting the exams don't even understand. And I feel that's a particularly Australian thing, that they're so laid back, they don't really seem to care, that sometimes the exam questions are completely wrong. But Ruixue, I wanted to ask you about that sort of centralized filter idea that the Gaokao is also winnowing down and creating the kind of people that China wants. And now this idea that out of nowhere, AI seems to be a very, very popular major. I think it's the 6th most popular major in 2025. According to university enrollment, electrical engineering and automation come before. But what can we tell from this list of popular majors? It seems to me surprising that AI is just so high on that list.
I think that comes to the strength of the Chinese education, at least from the national perspective, because it's a centralized system, right? So the government has a lot of leverage in deciding not only how many students would become college graduates, but also in what field. I'm not surprised because it's always very effective in the 1990s until early 2000s. So the government promoted biology a lot. I think biology would be the 21st century science. And then there's a lot of students study biology. Now today, you see, it's true that maybe too many of them study biology. Many of them actually go abroad and couldn't find a biology faculty position and they turn to other majors. But, because of this, they do produce a lot of talent in biology. And now many of them become entrepreneurs and scientists in the biotech industry. And when I go to college, and Carol would know this as well, in the early 2000s, actually economics and law were promoted. And there are many, many new schools in economics and finance. And I, I was lucky. I chose economics and like it. But there are many, many people chose economics just because the government think it's very useful and there are more slots. And today, obviously, with US-China competition, AI is the sexiest, most sexy, not sexist, sorry, the most sexy, and my broken English, sorry, the sexy and the hottest major. So I'm not surprised. On top of this quota, so I mentioned that this quota by region, but it's also by field. So the government, if what the government wants more AI people, it can simply say this year we have this amount of students who would become AI majors. And that would work. But on the other hand, the government also can put a lot of resources to the industry. So the reason families respond to the government agenda is because they see, the job opportunity. There'll be more job opportunity in this kind of industries. And what's declined a lot in this process is my major, is economics. And now students study economics, because now at my time, the top two universities, Tsinghua and Beida, would get the number one students from each province to study economics and finance. Now they can barely get top 20 or top 50 because all those students now are studying STEM.
I think China is not unique in this respect. Policymakers in many countries are falling over themselves to pour resources into AI and to train people up in these areas, and really criminally neglecting the social sciences and humanities. Well, I would say that as an education professor. But I do think this is very serious, a very serious issue. I have to say, at the same time, that many social scientists don't help themselves by, the sort of rubbish that a lot of us waffle on about, or
Speak for yourself, Edward. We just did an episode on AI, and it seems China's whole thinking about AI is quite different. I mean, in the West, we're obsessed with AGI, getting to this general sort of artificial general intelligence, but in China, the focus seems more on how can we apply this to everyday life. And having just marked a pile of student essays, I've got to say I'm not a fan of AI right now. But one thing that's very, very different about the Chinese system is this suzhi education, this idea of suzhi jiaoyu, which is something I think Karron would have experienced. And I believe your high school was quite famous for its suzhi education. What does that actually look like for you, Karron? I mean, how do you teach citizens to be of better quality?
I mean, now we know that. So when 素质教育 first came out, which means like holistic and quality education, people believe in that thing. And then after some years, parents realized that it actually depends on how much money you have. What means 素质教育? Okay, apart from study, you're gonna do sports, maybe you learn instruments and that thing. But actually in like the Chinese schooling system, it's not that advanced. The government doesn't have that much money to pour into the school. Like Australia here, you got a guitar for every single student. I was quite surprised, actually. So what 素质教育, it's actually more on the parents. How are you gonna spend the money for your children to learn that outside of school? And that's the thing. So which means like in Shanghai, in Guangzhou, some wealthy cities, people have, the outcome is that they have better 素质教育. But like in the schooling system, they'll use it as marketing promotion. But actually, as far as I can see in the school, we still value like the marks. We still focus on exam. The best example I can think of about 素质教育 is another high school in Guangzhou, which is like maybe the number one high school, Guangdong experimental school. They do good 素质教育. Because like 50% of the students, they end up studying abroad. And they come from like a family with the top tier in the society. So they don't care about their scores. That's what I said. And then I feel like 素质教育 would end up like the Gaokao system. The inference for me, even though I took the exam 10 years ago, it's like the whole mindset is about we do useful things. It's like the pragmatist mindset. In my generation, I got into business administration. I don't know what that is at that time. But people with the high scores, they would go into that major. Okay, I just choose it. Maybe they would bring me better job opportunity. I think that's the same with the AI education now. But the whole thing is that we always think about the future.
So I wanted to ask you each to reflect a little bit on the Gaokao and whether or not it's fit for purpose. Ruixue, one of the findings in your book is that Chinese high school students are way ahead of their US counterparts in maths and science and language. But then after 4 years of college, that edge has disappeared. I mean, the Chinese system, is it turning out students who are able to think critically and creatively, or just students who are able to memorize and duplicate?
I do have a lot of thoughts on this issue because you often hear people say this type of hypothesis that, Chinese testing system kills creativity, or Chinese are not good at making 0 to 1, but can make it quickly from 1 to 100. You hear this a lot. I want to add a perspective here. First, in short, I disagree. So just if you know my answer. So this is why I feel like creativity is a very loaded word. It's difficult to know what it is. The Chinese testing system certainly has problems. So it's more useful to discuss the specific skills that kind of get fostered or stifled by this system, right? Rather than use a very loaded word. It's like you go to see a doctor. It's better that the doctor tell you why you are sick rather than just tell you you are sick, right? It's useless. So in that perspective, I do think the testing system has problems in terms of fostering. First, there are two types of skills that could be very important and could be even more important in the future. One is the social skills, right? As you can imagine, in this testing system, it's mainly written test. You are not encouraged to talk or ask questions or communicate with others, right? The best students, the model should be you just silent every day, but when the exam result is out, you are top 1, right? That's me when I was in school. So obviously, social skills has been very important in the labor market, but with automation or AI, as some of you hinted, it could be even more important. And the Chinese education, indeed, is not very bad. Not only not fostering it, but maybe actively stifles it. It will be much more fun to share my book if I have had better social skills. But unfortunately, you have to, bear with me anyway. The second type of skills is this courage to challenge authority. It's true in this kind of exam-based system, you are not only not encouraged, you are actively discouraged from challenging your teacher and challenging the correct answer. But I would also want to emphasize this is not only about the education, it's about the whole societal structure, right? Even if you are Einstein, you graduate from Tsinghua or Beida or a non-elite college, you're still Einstein. But if you go to a work, right, if you go to university, you have to listen to your dean. If you go to a factory, you have to follow your boss. So this is not only the education itself that kills something. I would say so the whole societal structure, this hierarchical structure, that you have to follow the authority. It's better you spend your effort developing better relationship with the authority rather than have creative destruction to challenge authority. So I see this not as an education problem, more as an incentive structure of the Chinese society.
Edward, just finally to you, I was struck in Taiwan, people referred to sort of the Gaokao virus, that not just in China, but in Taiwan, everything is an exam. Your promotion is an exam. Getting ahead in life is an exam. There's just exams all the way, so basically exams all the way down. I mean, is there any chance once this sort of cycle is in there that, in Korea, it's even more extreme. It's all about you score well and you join Samsung. Is there any chance of this being wound back, or is the Gaokao virus likely to continue to spread not just in East Asia but throughout the world?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I to a large extent, I agree with Ruixue that it's not so much about the exam itself, how it's structured, how it's set. It's more about the sort of social context. Why do exams assume so much importance for people? And, this is about factors like, the fact that you don't get any second chance, essentially. And this is true in Korea, as it is in Japan, as it is in China. That, these exams, particularly the college entrance exams, brand you for life. When a new cabinet is announced by the new prime minister in Japan, which happens quite regularly, you'll see newspapers print lists of the ministers, often with the university from which they graduated in brackets after their names. Now, I don't think that happens in Australia, does it? Doesn't happen in Britain, as far as I'm aware.
Might sort of disrupt things when all the Labour guys went to posh private schools and, the class warriors that went to the fanciest private school.
That's the same in England. But this is something that Ruixue mentions in the book. I mean, it's been referred to as first-degree discrimination. The idea that this thing brands you for life, you basically got one chance to sort of acquire that branding. And actually, when I applied for my job here at Kyushu University, my CV had to give not just the year, but the day at which I entered primary school and graduated from primary school, then entered middle school, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then every single job. And if there was a gap on my CV when I sort of wasn't working or wasn't working.
Did you get questioned about what did you do during your gap year? What did you do?
I didn't take a gap year. Actually, the university wouldn't allow me to. It's just been a constant source of resentment and regret. But the point of this is that it's regarded as sort of socially unacceptable to step off that escalator. I mean, in my case, I had to lie about my primary schools because I couldn't remember when I'd actually entered and exited them. But with the students, once they get to the sort of third year or fourth year of their undergraduate degrees, then they're hunting for jobs. Most of them want to make sure that they got a definite job to go to after graduating. And then institutions will look to recruit cohorts of basically people at the same age in most cases, and then push them through the institution as a cohort. Now, I think China maybe in that respect, Ruixue probably knows better than me, slightly less rigid than Japan in some ways, actually. But this makes it extremely hard to miss out on taking an exam at the time when everyone else is due to take it and say, well, I'm going to do something else with my life for a few years and then I'll come back and I'll take that exam again, because institutions will think there's something wrong with you. The real root of the competitive intensity is not with the exam itself, it's with the stakes attached to it by society. And if you want to reduce those stakes, then you have to allow more flexibility in the labour market. Create a situation where people can take a break from education, then come back to education, take a break from work, then come back to work without being penalised. And the government has to, I think, take more responsibility for creating a sense of social security. And this is where, Ruixue or Graham, I think, alluded to increasing competitive intensity around exams, not just in China or East Asia, but elsewhere in the world.
Let me just ask one final question to you, Karron. Given the time that you've now spent outside China, how do you look back at the Gaokao and your experience? Has it made you lose faith in the efficacy of the Gaokao to educate?
Yeah, connected to what Edward just said. Because when you come into the same school, even in uni, you feel like, okay, we're all sitting here in the lecture room, we are all the same. But actually, when you graduate, you feel like we are actually not the same. We come from different families. So for my generation, most of them, if their family has something for them, they'll go back to their family. Because it's hard to surpass the previous generation. concerning the current society status. It's hard for you to create something and then you become a millionaire suddenly. It's hard. But when you were studying, you feel like we are all the same. I think that's the illusion of equality. And when I went to work, I realized that although we go through the same Gaokao, it's sort of equal, but they have their parents to arrange jobs for them. And I need to went to the job market. That's my thing. And the second is like, there's a lot of disadvantages of the system, but I think most Chinese will agree that it provides an equal system. Because I was asked about the 素质教育 quality education. Actually, it feels for most Chinese people, it's creating inequality for quality education. That's a dilemma. Because as I said, once you go out of the exam system, like the knowledge transfer system, parents need to put a lot of money to build up your quality. Quality is not for free, but exam is free. At least in the system, you got free schooling. And then if you work hard, you earn the equality yourself. I think it still works at some point. And I feel like lecturing is still the most effective way. And then China, even now, China can't afford more expensive teaching way. If you're going to create students like a classroom with 20 students, you need more teachers, you need more rooms. Like in my class, we have like 50 students per class. And one teacher's teaching there, they just give the lecture, and then you take notes, that's it. If you're going to transfer it to like a seminar or workshop, you discuss the problem back and forth. That's a lot more resources that needs to put in. So I think it's like different perspective. As I grow older, I sort of understand. It's not perfect, but it has some reasons for that.
That's a very good place to end our discussion. Karron Huang, Ruixue Xia, Edward Vickers, thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
You've been listening to the Literate Podcast, bringing you China from beyond the Beijing Beltway. Many thanks to our guests and to my co-host, Louisa Lim. We're on air thanks to support from the Australian Centre on China and the World. Our editing is by Andy Hazel, background research by Wing Kwong, our music is by Susie Wilkins, and our cartoons and GIFs are courtesy of Seb Danta. Bye for now.